Even in an era of Me Too, sexual assault is still a reality. For this week's United Ways report, I'm joined by Bria Hutchinson, Executive Director of Sexual Assault Centre, Kingston. So Bria, I hear the term sexualized violence. Can you tell me what that means?
Yeah, sexualized violence is describing, a group of violence and patterns and behaviors that are inappropriate, and they're based on the violation of consent or not seeking consent for sexual behaviors. So it include everything from what we traditionally think of rape and sexual assault to pressuring, threats of violence, stalking, a broader spectrum of violence that is sexual in nature.
So I always think of sexual assault as some guy hiding in the shadows in a parking lot and ready to jump out at me when I'm trying to get to my car. But that's not all it is. There's more to it than that, isn't there? Or does that still happen?
That definitely still happens, but I think that's the common conception a lot of people have, that it's a strange man in the bushes. And while it does happen, the vast majority of sexual violence, 95% of circumstances, the perpetrator is known to the survivor. So that is often boyfriends, husbands, family members, or people on first dates or roommates. And
Or
it's
we hear about date rape with drugs going into drinks. Do you still hear about that?
very much so. I wish it was a thing of the past, and I know there was a lot of attention paid to it in the past, but date rape and drug-facilitated sexual violence still are very much real things that we deal with in Kingston.
So I always think of this as maybe watching Law and Order, where the police or somebody comes in with someone has just reported the sexual assault. But sometimes people come to you and it was a long time ago. What do you hear? How long ago are we talking sometimes?
Yeah, so at our center, we support about 380 to 400 survivors each year. And we find about half are survivors of recent sexual violence and half are survivors of historic sexual violence. And there is some in between of folks who've experienced both. Sexual violence is a very personal, deep, and traumatizing event. It takes a lot of time for folks to feel ready to begin to process and start to unpack some of the long-lasting effects of sexual violence, particularly for people in relationships or survivors of childhood sexual abuse. A lot of that abuse is normalized and told that it's just the way things are, and moving through that and being seen and putting a name, sexual violence, to it can take a long time.
Do you sometimes get people who are coming to you many years after, perhaps it was something that happened to them as a child, but they wait until this person has died before they come forward? Does that happen?
Very much so. There is so much. There's so much happening in the survivors and stories like that. Kingston, unfortunately, has the distinction of having the highest rate of childhood sexual violence in Ontario, of police-reported sexual violence. And so that's actually, unfortunately, really common experience here in Kingston of folks who survived childhood trauma and have waited 40, 50, 60 years before coming forward to seek the support they deserve.
That is a long time to carry a secret.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I think about a lot of the stories, and and it's complicated because it's hard, and our society has normalized sexual violence so much so. Oftentimes, I'm taken back when I meet some people who come to us and they tell us they thought it was normal. This is just how boys experienced or experimented with sexual violence, or it wasn't sexual violence, it was just creepy. And that normalization of really unhealthy and unwanted behaviors, which is violence.
Maria, what do you attribute that to? Like how does something like that become normalized? Is it the media, social media? Like what's doing this?
Well, it's a long-term problem. Rape and sexual violence has been with humans for as long as we've existed in societies. So this normalization of behaviors has been a long-term process. So undoing it has been taking equally as long of an effort. It gets normalized by sexual violence. People often think it's about sex. They think it's about perpetrators wanting sex and survivors not wanting to give it. But sexual violence is a lot more about power. It's about imbalance of power and ability to exert power over another. That's why you see it, and particularly for like within familial violence or childhood sexual violence, is about people with power trying to exert it over others, and that's just not acceptable.
But that's really what it comes down to. It has nothing to do with affection or sex or any of those things. Any insights into why Kingston is a high rate of this sort of thing? Any ideas?
So I don't have an idea. At this point, what I'm really excited about, and something I'm really proud about working with United Way, is the United Way has been able to marshal resources from Queen's University throughout the community to put together these questions and put them to researchers. You know, Kingston has many indicators of higher rates of violence against women. More women are homeless on the streets, more with the highest rates of police reported sexual violence. And United Way is marshaling those resources to start getting Queens to ask and answer these questions. So right now, I only have hairballs, back of napkin ideas, but it's really exciting that we're moving to starting to ask and answer those questions.
It is. When things get back to normal, then a lot of things could start being investigated. But Dan, speaking of, how are you doing these days in isolation? What's changed, and what has stayed the same?
So our center is a little blessed. We received a grant back in June 2019 to begin exploring and developing the best practices for delivering distance counseling for survivors of sexual violence. So about a year ago, we started building our team to start working remotely, not exclusively, but as part of our operations, so that we could better support rural, northern, and transient populations. So when COVID started in the beginning of March, the transition to distance counseling was a really successful one. We've managed to transition about 90% of our survivors and service users to distance counseling, which is just an absolute blessing that we're able to continue to offer our great services and standard of care in these troubling times.
It sounds like you're better prepared than a lot of people were for this. I mean, it all happened so fast, didn't it? That suddenly we're walking around taking in movies, and the next day, nothing.
Yes.
It happened so fast, and you were prepared. And you mentioned a grant. Where does your funding come from?
So our center is funded through about 5 different programs. This grant that I speak to is from the Women and Gender Equality of the federal government. It's called Examining Health Equities and Delivering Trauma-Informed Video Counseling. And it's a little bit of luck that we had this foundation built in. The fact that we had a 9-month head start to train our staff, to build the equipment, to bring on the necessary skills was a wonderful thing. We know more than ever our services are needed during a time of a pandemic. Sexual violence and pandemics are unfortunately go hand in hand. We've seen about a 25% increase in call volume to our crisis line. So we lucked out being in such a good position to weather the storm.
Wow, I'll say you were. It's fabulous. What happens, and you're United Way funded as well.
Correct.
There's
Yeah,
that. Yeah, and that's ongoing.
correct. United
Oh,
Way
yeah.
funds our Youth First Response program. So going back to Kingston having the highest rate in Ontario of childhood reported sexual violence, United Way funds our high school response program, so we can give ages 12 to 19 survivors between those ages rapid access to our services. Where a survivor normally has to wait between 20 to 25 days to get services, because of the United Way, youth between the ages of 12 and 19 can get access the same day, or if not, within 2 or 3 days.
And that's just from what you said before, so that a teenager doesn't carry it around with him or her until for 40 years before they actually talk to somebody. But it leads me to something else. If someone confided in me, an untrained person, they just just want to talk about it, what should I do? How should I respond? I wouldn't know where to begin. What do you think just
So,
someone like me should do?
so I think the first thing to take note of and to remember, if someone discloses to you, it's because they trust you, and that they're making that disclosure because they have faith in you, and you are the person ready to hear that disclosure. I always start with a thank you. When someone discloses to me, I say, like, thank you for sharing that with me. Like, sexual violence sucks. and I'm sorry that you had to experience this. So I like to start off with like acknowledging and appreciating the offer. And the first thing I think all human beings have a natural tendency to do is, how can I help? Would you like to know some resources? Do you just want to be angry with me, like, and just take up space? And do you want a hug? Maybe not a hug in this COVID times, but like, I'm here for you. And
Okay.
survivors are very sensitive. We're sensitive. We're strong. We're resilient. But we also don't disclose to, you know, our mechanics necessarily. We disclose to people we trust. We disclose to the people that we know can handle it.
Can you use more volunteers in helping you carry out your mission?
Most definitely. So we have a 24/7 crisis line. It's a telephone line. It's staffed exclusively by volunteers, and it's doing great. But during these COVID times, like I said, we've seen about a 25% increase in service demand. So as a consequence, we've been developing an online chat and text tool so we can support more survivors simultaneously. We are finding youth disproportionately like to text. They don't want to make a phone call to seek out supports. They want to text back and forth. So we're trying to develop and evolve our services to meet those youth. For us, that means we're rebuilding a whole new crisis line. We're keeping the one we already have and we're adding a new one. So we're very much looking for volunteers who can reach out to our center on our website to help us build that second chat line.
And maybe somebody with technical skills could be a real bonus to you.
We are great counselors. We're great therapists. We are great advocates for change. We're not necessarily tech wizards, so we always appreciate the help we can get.
Well, I hope it happens for you. And finally, donations. Do you accept donations
Yes.
to help you? Okay, and it'll be on the screen where they can send a donation.
Mhm. So May is actually Sexual Assault Awareness Month. So this is normally our biggest month for raising support and awareness for our services. And it's a hard time to raise funding for charities right now in Canada. I don't want to ask anyone to break their bank, but any thoughts to the survivors of sexual violence are greatly appreciated.
Well said. So thank you so much for being with us today, Bria, and stay safe.
Thank you for your time. Stay safe.